The ocean does not forget. It listens. It absorbs. It keeps what we give to it, ships, lives, voices, secrets, and holds them in silence. Long after the noise of engines fades, after the flags are taken down and the maps are redrawn, the sea remains, vast and unjudging. When we look across its surface, we see only blue, calm, eternal. But beneath, the story of the 20th century still sleeps. Among the mountains of coral and the plains of sand lie the shapes of submarines, long, narrow, quiet, resting exactly where they stopped breathing. They are not wrecks, they are tombs. From 1941 to 1945, every ocean became a battlefield. On the surface, fleets clashed for islands, trade routes, and pride. Below, unseen, another war raged, a war of listening, stalking, and waiting. Thousands of men entered that hidden world. Hundreds never returned. Their disappearance was not dramatic. It was almost gentle, a flicker on a radar screen, a radio transmission that never came, a family that waited at the dock until the waves grew cold. This is their story, and the story of those who waited, long after the world had moved on. The first sound is always the same, the clang of the hatch, a final metallic note as it locks, sealing out the sky. Inside, the air thickens with expectation. Engines hum, voices drop to whispers. The boat begins to slide beneath the surface, and daylight fractures into green. For a submariner, the descent feels both thrilling and terrifying. At 20 feet, the sea becomes muffled. At 50, the world disappears. At 200, there is only vibration, the steady throb of machinery, and the slow compression of the hull. Every dive is a small act of faith, faith in the engineers who built the vessel, in the men who stand beside you, and in your own ability to stay calm when surrounded by pressure strong enough to crush steel. They called it the silent service. But silence was never complete. There were always sounds, a drip from condensation, the scrape of a boot, the faint metallic echo of a spanner against a pipe. Every sound had weight. Every sound could mean survival or detection. The men who chose this life were different. Many were young, 19, 20, drawn not by glory, but by curiosity. Some came from farms in Iowa or villages in Hokkaido, others from the shipyards of Glasgow or the harbours of Fremantle. They wanted to see the world, and the submarine promised adventure. They quickly learned that adventure meant confinement, no privacy, no daylight, no certainty of return. Sleep came in fragments, bunks were shared in shifts, the air smelled of diesel, sweat, and humanity. The walls sweated with condensation. Fresh water was precious, reserved for engines and food. After weeks at sea, beards grew wild, uniforms stiffened with salt. But they endured, because endurance was the only luxury available. Each patrol began with optimism. Photographs were tucked above bunks, letters folded inside lockers. There was always talk of the next leave, the next meal ashore, the promise of just one more trip. Yet beneath the bravado lay awareness. Every submarine was temporary. Every voyage could be the last. When they submerged, time lost its meaning. Without daylight, men lived by routine. Watch, eat, sleep, repeat. A single patrol could last 50 days, sometimes 70. By the third week, faces turned pale under electric bulbs. Jokes became shorter, tempers sharper. The world shrank to steel walls and the soft voice of the captain over the intercom. And still, they trusted the sea. Or perhaps learned to bargain with it. A veteran once wrote in his diary, "The ocean does not hate us. It simply waits. It waits for mistakes." Every man aboard knew the truth behind those words. A leak no thicker than a pencil mark could end them. A valve left half closed could flood a compartment before anyone could reach the handle. When the pressure gauge trembled, hearts followed. Above them, the war raged in headlines. Battles were fought and won. But down below, heroism was measured in hours of silence. in the ability to remain calm while the hull moaned and rivets ticked like a distant clock. Sometimes, when they surfaced at night, the world seemed impossibly beautiful. Stars filled the sky from horizon to horizon. The ocean was black glass, broken only by the faint white wake of their passage. Men came topside just to breathe. Real air, cool and alive. They spoke softly, afraid to disturb the perfection of the night. Then, as always, came the order. Dive. And the sky disappeared once more. To serve beneath the sea was to live between worlds, unseen, unheard, and often unremembered. But within that silence, bonds formed stronger than any on land. Each crew became a single heartbeat. If one man faltered, all fell. They learned to read each other's eyes, to understand what was felt but never said. When a submarine was lost, it was not just 70 men. It was 70 families, 70 sets of dreams, laughter, arguments, promises. Gone in an instant, replaced by nothing but static. The ocean has no graves, yet it holds more souls than any cemetery on land. And it remembers everyone. The deeper a submarine goes, the more the world changes. Light fades first, replaced by green, then by black. Sound follows next, swallowed by pressure until even your heartbeat feels loud. And finally, the mind begins to change. It learns to measure time not by the sun, but by orders. Dive, hold depth, surface at midnight. Life becomes rhythm, mechanical, relentless, and strangely comforting. Every patrol begins the same way. The crew assembles on deck, faces upturned toward the wind. They smell the salt, the oil, the faint scent of home drifting from the port they're leaving behind. Then comes the whistle, the shouted commands, the slow descent into the conning tower. One by one, they vanish inside, leaving only the ocean behind them. For the next several weeks, the sea will be their world. Inside the boat, everything has its place. Every bolt, every switch, every man. Space is measured in inches, movement in careful choreography. A single careless gesture could upset a gauge, spill a chart, or block a hatch. The youngest crewmen learn quickly, not through words, but by imitation. They follow the rhythm of the veterans, who know how to move without sound, how to speak without raising their voices. There are no ranks in fear. When the hull creaks, everyone listens the same way. When the sonar pings echo closer, everyone breathes more slowly. Courage in the deep is not loud. It's the discipline to remain still while the world above tries to find and destroy you. Food in those depths becomes more than sustenance. It becomes time. Fresh bread and fruit mark the beginning of a patrol. Canned meat and powdered coffee mark the middle. By the end, meals are mostly memory, lukewarm and tasteless, but eaten with the same quiet ritual. The cook is both servant and priest, his small galley a temple of routine that keeps men sane. He knows each man's favourite dish, though he cannot provide it. He jokes about what he'll cook when they return. Sometimes they believe him. There is no day or night. Men sleep when told, wake when shaken, work when needed. Some dream of home, others of the surface, the taste of air unfiltered by metal and fear. Dreams become precious. They are the only escape left. But even in dreams, many hear the sound of depth charges. Faint, distant, but persistent. Fear, too, has a rhythm. It starts with a sound, the faint metallic pulse of sonar, steady as a heartbeat. Ping. Pause. Ping. Each one closer, clearer, sharper. Men freeze mid-task, eyes darting to the ceiling. The captain listens through headphones, face unreadable. He gives quiet orders, ballast, rudder, depth. Each one measured, deliberate. The boat begins to sink deeper, the air thickening with humidity and tension. Then the first explosion, distant. Then another, closer. The sound doesn't come through the ears, but through the body. It's a thud that rolls through the bones, a shockwave that bends light bulbs and ripples the skin of water in cups. Sometimes dust falls from pipes. Sometimes men cross themselves quietly, lips moving without sound. The captain never looks away from the gauges. He knows that survival depends not on bravery, but on control. Too fast, and the boat may breach. Too slow, and pressure will crush it. He whispers, "Hold depth," and the crew obeys. For hours they sit in silence, motionless but alive. When it ends, no one cheers. They only breathe again, realizing they hadn't done so properly for a long time. Someone makes coffee. Someone else writes a note in the log. Life resumes as if nothing happened. But something always remains, an echo of fear, an invisible scar that no one mentions. Sometimes they surface after the danger has passed, and the world above seems impossibly vast. The sky feels too big, the air too cold. Men climb onto the deck and stare at the horizon. It feels unreal, a world too free for those who have lived so long in confinement. They speak in whispers, as if afraid the sky might break. And then, without warning, the order comes. Dive. And they vanish once more, taking the stars with them. On some boats, the crew kept traditions to stay human. The Americans had lucky mascots, stuffed animals tied to pipes, pin-ups taped to bulkheads. Japanese crews carried small Shinto charms, hung from periscopes or pinned near the control room. Australians wrote the names of hometowns on shells. Britons sang old sea shanties during calm hours, their voices soft enough not to carry through the hull. Each gesture was a bridge, a reminder that there was still a world beyond the deep. Letters were treasures. They arrived in bundles before a mission, read by dim light during the first nights at sea. The paper smelled faintly of home. Some men carried them in breast pockets, over their hearts. Others refused to read them until return, a superstition against tempting fate. For those who vanished, those letters often outlived them, tucked into uniforms that the ocean kept safe. Commanders knew that every patrol eroded something inside their men. Sleep deprivation, noise, isolation. They all worked slowly, invisibly, yet they continued. Not out of hatred, nor ideology, but out of duty. To leave the war unfinished was unthinkable, and so they dived again and again, each mission a gamble between life and eternity. It was not uncommon for a submarine to vanish without trace. A torpedo might detonate too close. A pressure valve might fail. A mine might strike the bow. No one would know. Only the sea would register the loss. A brief pulse of sound, then silence. The reports always said the same thing. Overdue, presumed lost. 3 words to summarize 70 lives. The families received them in envelopes marked with official seals. Some read them once and never again. Others carried them folded in pockets, the paper worn thin by years of fingers tracing each letter. Yet, despite the losses, the submariners returned to sea. Each patrol was a continuation of the last. The names changed, but the pattern remained. Because beneath all fear lay something deeper: pride. Not arrogance, but the quiet pride of men who knew they did something few could imagine. In later years, survivors would describe the ocean as a living being, vast, powerful, but strangely fair. It spared those who respected it and claimed those who didn't. It had moods: calm, furious, indifferent. They said you could feel it watching you, deciding. No one truly mastered the sea. They only borrowed time from it. The war turned men into statistics. But below the surface, humanity persisted. Fragile, tired, resilient. One engineer once wrote in his journal, "When you are surrounded by water in every direction, you begin to understand the value of a single breath. Every breath is a miracle, every sound a promise. Every sunrise you survive to see is something you no longer take for granted." That was life in the depths. A series of small miracles measured against the vast indifference of the sea. and when a submarine failed to return, the miracle simply stopped. But the silence that followed was not absence, it was remembrance. By 1943, the Pacific Ocean had become a maze of death and silence. Its vast blue surface looked unchanged, calm, infinite, eternal. Yet beneath it, war pulsed like a hidden heartbeat. The ocean was no longer just geography. It was a battlefield without borders, a graveyard without crosses. Submarines were everywhere. Japanese boats slipped from their hidden bases in Rabaul and Truk, gliding toward Australian convoys under the moon. American submarines crept along the shipping lanes from the Philippines to Formosa, hunting anything that carried the rising sun. British and Dutch boats patrolled the Indian Ocean, striking at what remained of Japan's supply arteries. Everywhere, silence was weaponized. For the Americans, the submarine war was one of attrition, slow, methodical, and relentless. Their orders were simple: choke Japan's empire, destroy its tankers, its transports, its lifelines. They became the invisible siege, unseen but inescapable. In the logbooks of the Pacific Fleet, submarines were called the long arm of vengeance. But the men inside them knew better. They were just survivors, trying to complete one more patrol. By late 1943, the US Navy's silent service had turned the tide of the Pacific. A single boat, USS Wahoo, under Commander Dudley Morton, sank Japanese ships with surgical precision, haunting the Sea of Japan like a ghost. USS Tang, led by Richard O'Kane, became legend, striking 24 enemy vessels before the ocean claimed her too. Each success came at a cost. Each name that entered the Navy's Hall of Fame would later appear on its list of the missing. In Japan, the story unfolded differently. Early in the war, the Imperial Navy's submarines were among the most advanced in the world. Large, fast, with incredible range. They hunted battleships, scouted for carriers, and ferried supplies across the empire. Their commanders, men like Kanashi Takakazu of I-19, believed they could change the course of war, and for a time, they did. In September 1942, Takakazu's torpedoes sank the American carrier Wasp, damaged the battleship North Carolina, and destroyed a destroyer, all in a single salvo. It was the most successful torpedo spread in history. But victories faded quickly. As Japan's war turned defensive, its submarines were used less for attack and more for desperation, carrying rice, medicine, and ammunition to island garrisons that had been cut off. Boats designed to destroy were now lifelines for the dying, and the ocean, indifferent as ever, began to take them one by one. The American blockade grew tighter with every passing month. Destroyers prowled with radar and sonar. Aircraft dropped magnetic mines across straits and harbors, and hunters became the hunted. Submarines that once slipped unseen through night now found the ocean shrinking around them. In the Imperial Navy's headquarters at Kure, messages began to pile up. No contact with I-42, I-48 overdue, presumed lost. Admiral Toyoda's staff stopped reading them aloud after a while. There were too many. For the men at sea, loss became routine. They didn't talk about it, but they felt it. When a sister boat failed to return, there was no ceremony, just silence at mess, eyes lowered, and a quiet understanding that the same could happen tomorrow. In both navies, the phrase "missing after patrol" was shorthand for a wound that had no closure. Each side called the other ruthless, and both were right. American torpedoes struck without warning, surfacing only to watch explosions through periscopes before vanishing again. Japanese submarines ambushed hospital ships and supply convoys, leaving survivors to the mercy of the sea. Mercy, in truth, belonged to no one. In the submarine war, there were no witnesses, only victors and ghosts. Yet even in this cold equation of hunter and hunted, humanity persisted. Letters found years later reveal moments of startling tenderness. One American engineer, writing aboard USS Trigger, confessed, "We pray every night not for victory, but for return." "We have done enough killing. We just want to see the sky again." A Japanese petty officer aboard I-169 wrote to his wife, "The sea is wide, but I still see your face in the reflection of the gauges." Neither letter reached its destination. Both men remained somewhere in the Pacific. By 1944, the toll was unimaginable. Of the 288 American submarines that served, 52 never returned. Each carried an average of 70 men, 3,600 souls, gone without a trace. For Japan, the number was even greater. 130 submarines lost, more than 14,000 men entombed forever beneath the waves. The ocean floor of the Pacific became their shared grave. Americans and Japanese lying side by side in silence, their stories ending where geography and morality no longer mattered. Naval officers sometimes called submarines iron coffins. The term originated in the Atlantic among German U-boat crews. But in the Pacific, it carried a different weight, less about horror, more about inevitability. Every sailor who descended into those cramped spaces accepted the truth. If death came, it would be swift, unseen, and eternal. No one would find them. No one could. When a submarine was declared overdue, the families received form letters. The tone was polite, bureaucratic, impossible. The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that your son's vessel has not returned from patrol and must be presumed lost. One mother, receiving such a letter in 1945, wrote in reply, "If he is lost, who is there to look for him?" The answer was silence. Even after the war, the silence persisted. Few wrecks were located. The technology did not exist. The oceans were too vast. Most submarines simply became myths, coordinates on old charts, rumors among sailors. Fishermen in the Philippines spoke of strange shapes on the seabed, of ghosts that whispered through nets. In Japan, old men swore that on certain nights you could hear the sound of engines rising faintly from the deep. The ocean, it seemed, still hummed with memory. Among those memories was the story of USS Tang. In October 1944, she fired her last torpedo, one that malfunctioned, circled back, and struck her own hull. Of her 87 crew, only 9 escaped to the surface. They were captured and spent the rest of the war in captivity. When they returned home, they carried the impossible weight of survival, the knowledge that they had witnessed the ocean taking their brothers. Commander O'Kane never forgot. He said later, "I heard no explosion, only the sound of the sea closing over us, and then nothing." For Japan, one of the final tragedies came with the loss of I-52. She was carrying gold, cobalt, and war materials to Germany in a desperate attempt to keep the alliance alive. In June 1944, American aircraft tracked her mid-Atlantic and sent her to the bottom. She lay there undiscovered for 50 years until explorers found her hull covered in black coral, her mission forever incomplete. These were not isolated stories. They were fragments of a single truth, that the war beneath the waves was never about victory or defeat. It was about endurance, patience, and the quiet understanding that every voyage might be the last. By the time the war ended in August 1945, the Pacific was littered with silence. Some submarines lay in shallow reefs, their shapes visible through clear water. Others rested in the abyss, 4 miles down, where light can never reach. When peace came, their absence became invisible. A peace bought not only by the living, but by those who would never return to claim it. The sailors who survived did not speak of it often. When asked, they would pause, look toward the horizon, and say only, "We lost many good men." No elaboration, no stories. Because how do you describe a death you never saw? How do you explain an ending that leaves nothing behind? For decades, the ocean kept its silence. And the world above, eager to rebuild, stopped listening. But the sea never forgets. It remembers the pressure of every hull, the echo of every explosion, the warmth of every life it claimed. And somewhere down there, beneath miles of water and time, the iron coffins of the Pacific still wait. Quiet, patient, eternal. When a submarine disappeared, The sea kept the men, but the silence it left behind belonged to those on shore. In the months after each patrol, life went on, or at least pretended to. The docks were busy, newspapers printed victories, but in small houses by the sea, curtains remained half-drawn, photographs stayed on mantels, and the smell of salt from the harbour carried something heavier than air. For mothers, the war never truly ended. Every knock at the door was both hope and dread. Telegrams arrived in stiff brown envelopes, the paper thin, the ink heavy. Inside, a few words typed by someone who had never met the man being mourned. Missing in action, presumed lost. No explanation, no body, no grave. Just the word presumed, a word that meant wait longer. Some refused to believe. They read of sailors rescued after months adrift, of islands still unexplored. If others had been found, perhaps theirs would be too. They imagined their sons somewhere in the Pacific, stranded, building shelters from driftwood, looking up at the same stars. They lit lamps each night, whispering prayers toward the horizon. Some refused to believe. They read of sailors rescued after months adrift, of islands still unexplored. If others had been found, perhaps theirs would be too. They imagined their sons somewhere in the Pacific, stranded, building shelters from driftwood, looking up at the same stars. They lit lamps each night, whispering prayers toward the horizon. Children grew into adults before realizing that waiting had become inheritance. Some joined the Navy themselves, chasing answers their parents had stopped asking. Others avoided the ocean entirely, unable to bear its smell. But every generation carried a fragment of that silence, a piece of the unanswered question that the war had left behind. In Japan, the waiting took on ritual. Families placed small wooden tablets, ihai, on home altars, bearing the names of sons who had vanished. Incense burned beside them each morning. The tablets were polished, repaired, repainted, a conversation between the living and the lost that outlasted governments and emperors. On Obon, the festival of the dead, lanterns floated down rivers and into the sea, their flames trembling on the water. Each light represented a spirit finding its way home. For many, those spirits were still beneath the waves. Across the Pacific, in American towns with names carved on memorial plaques, church bells rang on Sundays for men who had no resting place. Communities gathered each year at bases like Pearl Harbor and Groton. The names of the 52 lost submarines were read aloud. Wahoo, Trigger, Tang, Grayback, Pickerel. Each name followed by silence, a silence thick enough to feel. Yet even remembrance could not answer the simplest question. Where? Where were they? What happened in the final moments? Did they suffer? Did they know? The ocean gave no reply. In the decades that followed, technology changed faster than grief could. Sonar, satellites, deep-sea cameras, all promised discovery. But for most families, discovery never came. A few lucky ones received coordinates, photographs, even video of rusted hulls resting peacefully in the dark. For others, there was still nothing. Just the knowledge that somewhere, thousands of feet below, lay everything they had loved. One mother in Oregon wrote to the Navy every year until her death. Her son had served aboard USS Amberjack, missing since 1943. Each letter was the same. If you find them, please tell me. I will be here. She died in 1981. The submarine was found in 2017. No family remained to receive the news. In Japan, former naval officers began to write memoirs in the 1960s. They spoke not of tactics, but of guilt. One admiral wrote, "We told mothers their sons were heroes, but we did not tell them we had no graves to give them." The honesty was late, but it mattered. It acknowledged the invisible half of the war, the ones who stayed home and carried its weight. The waiting also shaped art. Songs appeared in both languages, soft melodies about oceans and stars. Poets wrote of listening for footsteps that never returned. Pain turned to ritual, and ritual to memory. Through remembrance, the lost were given a kind of afterlife, not in body, but in story. Yet grief has tides. It recedes, returns, changes shape, but never disappears. Sometimes it hides in ordinary moments. A woman setting 2 plates instead of 1. A man pausing at the sound of the tide before walking faster. Even decades later, survivors confessed that certain smells, diesel, salt, wet metal, could make them freeze. They called it the memory of pressure. Some wives remarried, many did not. Society urged them to move on, but love is stubborn. In Japan they were called sea widows. In America, simply Gold Star wives. Different words, same ache. They met each other at reunions, exchanged photographs of men who had never met, and spoke a shared language of loss that needed no translation. When letters from the front stopped coming, some families wrote their own. They wrote birthdays, holidays, ordinary days. We planted tomatoes today. Your daughter learned to swim. Then they placed the letters in bottles and released them at the shore. It was foolish, they said, but it was something to do. And sometimes doing was all that was left. Even governments learned to live with ghosts. Each navy built its own wall of names, polished each year, visited by schoolchildren who stare and ask, why didn't they come back? Teachers struggle for words, because how do you explain a war that ended not with explosions, but with absence? The families waited through wars that followed, through decades of peace, through the changing of flags and generations, and somewhere in that long waiting, patience turned into legacy. They passed on more than memory. They passed on endurance, a quiet strength shaped by the knowledge that love can outlast even the ocean. Some nights, when the wind is still, those who live near the sea say they can hear faint sounds, a low hum, a whisper beneath the waves. Maybe it's only imagination, or maybe it's the echo of engines long stopped, carrying across water that remembers everything. The ocean never explains, it only listens. Time passed. The men who had waited grew old. The children who had asked, when is he coming home, became parents themselves. And the war, that great, distant war, faded from conversation. But the sea, patient as ever, did not forget. For decades after 1945, the Pacific remained vast and unknowable. Maps marked the ocean floor as blank space. The world above moved on, yet the depths below still held their quiet cargo. Only the fish and the currents knew the resting places of the submarines. Then, slowly, the ocean began to reveal what it had hidden, not by choice, but through persistence, the persistence of those who refused to stop searching. In the 1980s, new technology began to change everything. Sonar mapping could now trace the contours of the seabed in detail. Remotely operated vehicles, small mechanical eyes, could descend thousands of feet, filming what no diver could reach. For the first time in history, humanity could look into the deep without drowning in it, and when they looked, they began to find them. It started with fragments, a propeller blade here, a torn section of hull there. Then, entire boats, resting upright as if still on patrol. The first was USS Grunion, lost in 1942 near the Aleutian Islands. Her crew of 70 had vanished without a trace. In 2006, 64 years later, she was found, perfectly preserved, her bow buried gently in sand. When the images reached the families, there were no cries, only quiet. One of the sons said softly, "Now we know where they are. That's enough." In 2005, a joint American-Japanese team discovered the wreck of USS Wahoo in the La Pérouse Strait. She had haunted history for decades, a boat both celebrated and cursed, her commander once condemned for attacking ships that carried civilians. But there she was, resting in 213 feet of water. Barnacles had claimed her, but the hull was intact. A diver described it as peaceful, like a sleeping animal. For the Japanese crew of the destroyer that had sunk her, the news brought unexpected comfort. Old men, long retired, wrote letters to the families of their former enemies. One read, "We too lost many sons to the sea. Now they rest together. Let them be at peace." Time, it seemed, had turned adversaries into mourners. Then came USS Grayback, discovered in 2019 off Okinawa after 75 years of mystery. Her location had been misrecorded, one digit wrong in wartime coordinates. That single mistake had kept her hidden for generations. When researchers finally corrected it, the sonar screen lit up with her shape. The familiar curve of the hull, the silent open hatch. Her crew's descendants gathered at Pearl Harbor when the news was announced. No words were needed, only tears and a slow salute. The ocean had begun to speak again. Japanese submarines, too, began to reappear. In 1995, explorers located I-52 in the Atlantic, a ghost of diplomacy, sunk while carrying gold and cobalt to Germany. Her cargo holds still gleamed faintly in the submersible lights, a reminder of how ambition had turned into tragedy. Later, the giant I-400 class boats were found off Hawaii, massive vessels designed to carry aircraft, symbols of a desperate empire's final hope. Inside, everything was still. Dishes in place, gauges frozen, uniforms turned to dust. It was as if the crew had only stepped out for air. Each discovery carried weight far beyond history. It was personal. For every wreck found, there were names to remember. Men once thought lost forever, now finally accounted for. The sea, in its own time, was returning what it had taken. The teams who searched, scientists, divers, descendants, spoke often of emotion. They were professionals, trained to observe without judgment, yet none left untouched. They described descending into darkness, seeing the first glint of metal, and feeling something shift inside. One said, "It's not fear, it's reverence. You realize you're not exploring a wreck, you're entering a memory." Underwater footage showed how peaceful it was. Fish swam through open hatches. Coral grew like lace over control panels. Nature had not destroyed the submarines, it had preserved them. The ocean, which had once claimed them, now guarded them with quiet dignity. Families who saw these images often spoke of gratitude. They no longer imagined their fathers and sons alone in the dark. They were part of the sea now, part of something vast and eternal. In knowing where they rested, the waiting could finally end. Not all discoveries were solemn. Some were reunions of sorts. In 2015, off the coast of Palau, divers located USS Palau, a submarine that had survived the war, but later been sunk as a target. Among the team was the grandson of one of her wartime crew. When he touched the hull, he whispered, "You brought him home." It was not logical, but it was true. The ocean had kept the promise his grandfather once made. We will return. In the 21st century, more submarines continued to be found. USS Stickleback, USS Albacore, USS Harder. Each discovery came with the same mixture of awe and sorrow. Technology had given humanity the power to see into the abyss, but not to change it. The wrecks remained untouched, left as war graves, sacred in their silence. No artifacts removed, no intrusion, only remembrance. The Japanese government, too, began its own program to locate lost submarines, not for glory, but for closure. As veterans died, their descendants wanted to know where they lay. One searcher said, "We are not looking for victory, we are looking for peace." In that, he echoed something universal: the understanding that to remember is to heal. When explorers discovered I-401 in 2005, they found the hull split, but the spirit intact. The massive submarine had been scuttled after Japan's surrender to prevent capture. For decades, its location was unknown. When it appeared on sonar, the lead researcher felt a weight in his chest. He later wrote, "It was like finding a lost friend you never knew you missed until he was gone." The ocean, after all, had never been cruel. It was indifferent, but in that indifference, there was also honesty. It gave back its secrets not through guilt, but through time. The discoveries changed the way people saw the war. No longer just maps and numbers, but faces, handwriting, laughter. In Japan, exhibitions showed letters recovered from waterproof containers, words written in ink that still clung to paper after 80 years. In America, museums displayed personal items found near wrecks, a harmonica, a penknife, a set of dice. Ordinary things that spoke more powerfully than medals. At ceremonies, survivors and families gathered together. American sons stood beside Japanese granddaughters, united by the same grief. They threw flowers into the sea, and for a moment, the ocean seemed to soften. The water rippled gently around the petals, carrying them outward, as if acknowledging the offering. Some researchers believe the ocean's floor is the largest unmarked cemetery in history. More than 50 submarines, hundreds of ships, thousands of planes. Each wreck a story, frozen mid-sentence. Each discovery, a reminder that war never truly ends. It simply sinks deeper. Yet through remembrance, something beautiful emerged. A quiet reconciliation, born not of treaties or politics, but of shared mourning. The men who once hunted each other now lie side by side. Their descendants stand together on decks, speaking softly into the wind. Rest well. Perhaps that is the final lesson of the ocean, that time erases the lines we draw between enemy and ally. Beneath the waves, there are no nations, only names, and every name, once spoken aloud, lives again. Morning on the Pacific. The sea is calm, a surface of glass broken only by the slow rise of the sun. Light travels downward in shafts, fading long before it reaches the places where the submarines sleep. There, in the cold stillness, the ocean breathes softly around them, patient and eternal. Above, the world has changed. Nations once at war trade as partners. Children learn the history of the conflict in classrooms lit by peace. But below, the traces remain, not of hatred, but of devotion, discipline, and the simple wish to come home. The ocean has never given us all its secrets. Some boats will never be found, their coordinates lost, their hulls buried beneath silt and time. Perhaps that is how it should be. For memory is not always a matter of discovery. Sometimes it lives best in imagination, in the spaces between what we know and what we choose to remember. Every year, at Pearl Harbor, at Fremantle, at Yokosuka, veterans and descendants gather. They speak the same words, though their languages differ. They speak softly, as if afraid to disturb the water. Each name is read aloud, followed by silence. A silence deeper than the sea itself. It is a ritual, and like all rituals, it is both sorrow and healing. When the wind moves across the harbour, it carries the faint smell of oil and salt. For those who listen closely, it almost sounds like breathing. Slow, steady, familiar. The sea is alive with remembrance. Every wave is a whisper. Every ripple, a story returning to the surface for a moment before sinking again. No one who served beneath those waves ever truly left. Their world, so small and so immense, remains with us. In museums, in letters, in the way we pause at the edge of the ocean and stare into its distance. We do not look for them there. We look for meaning. And perhaps that is what they have become. Not loss, but meaning. The submarine war was the quietest of all wars. A struggle of patience, endurance, and invisibility. Its victories were measured in silence. Its tragedies left no sound. Yet from that silence came a lesson stronger than any explosion. A lesson about how fragile courage can be, and how unshakable love is when it must wait without end. In Japan, there is a word, Nankai no Oka, the hill beneath the waves. It describes the seabed where sailors rest, unseen but honored. In America, they say on eternal patrol. Different words, same promise. They are not forgotten. Somewhere, far below, a current moves gently through the open hatch of a submarine that last saw daylight 80 years ago. Sand drifts across its deck like slow snow. Inside, the control dials still point to ahead 1/3. The crew, unseen, are at ease. They are no longer waiting. They are home. And the ocean, which once took them, now keeps them, not as trophies, but as memories. Memories of youth and duty, of fear and faith, of humanity in its most fragile form. If you stand on a quiet shore and listen, truly listen, you may hear it. Not the crash of waves, but something beneath. A low, endless hum. That is the sound of the deep. The echo of engines that have not run for generations. The heartbeat of the long wait finally at rest. And in that sound, faint but eternal, the ocean reminds us of what we are. Temporary, yet remembered. Mortal, yet connected. Lost, yet never alone. Because somewhere beneath the surface, in the silence the war left behind, they still sail. And the sea, vast, forgiving, unending, keeps their story alive.